Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And this week on the show, we are talking about Star Wars Resistance. And yes, it is January.
Wait.
Not August.
Wait
that
a
we're
second.
Talking.
We don't typically talk about Star Wars Resistance in January. At least we haven't for Check's Watch 4 years.
4 years, you say?
I do say. Why would that be, Brad?
Well, that would be because this week on January 26th marks the 4-year anniversary of Star Wars Resistance's series finale. When the show ended,
We cry.
We cried a lot. Yes, that is very true. And normally every year we hold Remembering Resistance Day in August, on August 29th. Last year, in solidarity with the two ongoing strikes for SAG-AFTRA and WGA, we held off on holding Resistance Day for the time being. We will be holding it again later this year on its normal date.
See you in August, besties. See you then.
But we didn't want to leave you hanging because literally days before the SAG strike started, we had the opportunity to chat with Chris Doc Wyatt and Kevin Burke, who are a writing and producing duo who have done so many things in the world of animation and even live action. So we had a chance to talk with them about their work on Resistance, their work together as a pair, and so much more. And we cannot wait to finally share this interview with you many, many months later and on the anniversary of Resistance's end.
Yes, and if you know and love Resistance, then you know and love their work because they were writers on The Triple Dark, the platform classic First Order Occupation, The Core Problem from Beneath, and the comics, which I love so much, All Aces Battle Royale and Sector 7E. And they are pretty prolific as a writing and producing duo and have written over 200 scripts for animated TV, including Critical Role, The Legend of Vox Machina, Ultimate Spider-Man, Lego Ninjago, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Transformers Rescue Bots. They recently created Transformers Bot Bots, and they've been Emmy nominated for their work on the animated short series Marvel's Rocket and Groot. And that is just a smidgen of their bio. So while we don't get to talk about all of those things in this interview, we do get to talk about Star Wars Resistance. And we hope that you enjoy this interview because we really enjoyed getting to chat with them.
Yes, absolutely. And once again, we did record this back in July, anticipating that there would be Resistance Day. So
if you feel summer vibes from this interview.
So we had that expectation in mind. But the good thing about Resistance is you can really celebrate it any day you want. Every day is Remembering Resistance Day for all we know. So, but that being said, we can't wait for you to hear this one. It's a really special one. So without further ado, let's turn it over to our conversation with Doc Wyatt and Kevin Burke. Happy Remembering Resistance Day, listeners. We are so honored to be joined by Star Wars Resistance writers Doc Wyatt and Kevin Burke. Welcome you both to the show. We're so happy to have you celebrating the 4th annual Remembering Resistance Day. First off, I just want to get started and ask you, how do you each remember Resistance now that we're here celebrating the show, talking about it? What's it like to reflect on your time and what the experience meant to you?
I mean, I can start. This voice is Kevin. This is the voice of Kevin and Doc fame. And if you put it in the context of what does it mean to you, we can get into the details of the process of doing it and, you know, being asked to be part of it and being flown up to Skywalker Ranch and breaking those stories for those few seasons. What is surreal, and this is how animation tends to be in general, is it takes about 1.5 to 2 years from writing it to airing it to that. So what's fascinating is that we're even having this conversation about remembering Resistance, you know, because there was a time where it was, you know, the sequels were coming out and we were writing the show alongside them and it was all something happening and we were super pumped about it. And now it's this great thing that we look back that we were a part of. Like our careers have, you know, gone on in all these different directions since then. And so this looking back on Resistance and being like, wow, what a great time that was, you know, what a great period to be part of that thing that was this show. It's only warm memories, and it's, like I said, it's a little surreal that it's now in the rearview mirror, because I distinctly remember getting that call and thinking, oh my gosh, like this show is coming out, like it's going to be fantastic, exciting, like we're part of this, and now we get to nostalgically discuss it. So I find that part surreal.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, so Kevin and I are writing partners, and we work together on all our scripts together. But when we would do the writers' rooms, we would alternate who traveled up for the room, and so we broke stories in writers' rooms at Skywalker Ranch, like Kev said, and also up at ILM. And it was just amazing to be on these campuses. It was amazing to just walk through ILM and see the history of the place. To see, they have, you know, they have C-3PO and R2-D2. They had the melted Vader mask. They had, Slimer. They had E.T.'s bicycle, and you just sort of walk through cinema history. And we broke these. We broke a lot of the stories when we were at ILM in this one conference room that was right next to Kathleen Kennedy's office, right? Like it shared sort of a communal space with Kathleen Kennedy's office. And we walked into this, and it's in the Presidio, and it's this storied building, and we're in there, we're breaking stories for half a day with Dave Filoni and Brandon Auman, and we're using these cork boards. We write ideas, and then we stick them to the cork board. And at the end of the day, like they had to like move or adjust the cork boards, and they sort of pulled the cork boards away from the wall, and what I had thought was just the wall was covering up windows, and what it was covering was this view of the Golden Gate Bridge from out of the top floor of the Presidio, which was one of the most stunning views I've ever seen in my life, and it had been hiding behind our cork boards all day, which was crazy. And we would take in the middle of the day, as a writer's room, we would take a break and sort of walk around there's some like water features around the Presidio, like a little, I guess, pond, and we would sort of stroll around the pond and talk about Star Wars. And it was amazing because the energy and the vibe was amazing. And when Dave Filoni was in the room, he was constantly sketching. Like he would just, that's what he, like when he's, you probably heard from other people, but when he's thinking up ideas, when he's brainstorming, he just has to keep his hands busy. And so he's constantly sketching, and he's like talking to you, but he's not making eye contact with you because he's sketching the whole time he's talking, or he's pitching to the whole room, but he's sketching as he pitches. And there's just this intense creative energy in that kind of a setting. Like, it was great because there was no egos in that writer's room. I mean, I guess it's a little bit humbling to be sitting in ILM. So I don't know how much of an ego you feel like you have, but like just this energy where everybody was working together and breaking stories and having fun. And it was like, it's like playing with your action figures in the backyard, but
yeah. Let me add to that, because most of the summits that I went to were at the ranch. I don't know, Doc, if you actually got to the ranch in the summits. Did you in that?
No, I all my summits were at ILM.
So the first one I went to was at the ranch, and this is to kick off the show. And I don't know if younger people realize this now. When we were kids, we loved Star Wars. The idea that you would grow up to write Star Wars wasn't even a dream, because one person did this, right? This was not something you got to do. I wanted to write Spider-Man as a kid because that was something people were going to perpetually be doing. But Star Wars was more or less off limits. Like it would be like a kid today thinking, I'm going to make an Avatar movie, right? It was one person's movie. And so when we went up to the ranch and we're sitting down there to break the stories, there was this surreal nature of, like, I'm here in this space that I've seen in so many documentaries about, making of Star Wars. These things were super inspirational to me, and we're here to make more Star Wars. That was utterly surreal, was this notion of like, holy crap, like we're part of this. This is actually Star Wars stuff happening right now. This is going to be, we're making up stories right now that are going to just be part of this canon, part of this thing that I loved as a kid and assumed was always kind of going to be off limits to other people, and it was opening up to everybody at that point, and that was super exciting.
I mean, you mentioned Dave Filoni, Kathleen Kennedy, Golden Gate Bridge, Skywalker Ranch. Like, I don't think there's many places in the world that you can beat as a working office for the day,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm starting to get self-conscious about my office here, work from home. Jeez.
Yeah, and for the record, we don't work. That's not the normal way that people get to write animated television. And I mean, to that point, one of the greatest things about the ranch and even IOM is that most studios you work at or most offices, you go to a writer's room. It's usually some conference room that you have to walk by the marketing department. You have to walk by these other, like all these people that may not even know who they are. The ranch is set up for creatives. Like there was almost nothing to do there but be creative. Like food was brought, you stayed there, like there was never that sense that you get at other companies. And this is not against any other companies. It is just how George Lucas sort of set up this creative retreat, was that if you were writing and creating, you didn't have to see the other departments. You didn't have to run into all the other HR people or all that stuff. You could just be in your space. That was elsewhere, and this was just a creative space to create stuff, which was, always his dream from film school, was to create that space in which you could just be creative and not have to worry about the business aspect of it. And that very much was the vibe.
Mm. You mentioned like dreaming or not even imagining the dream of writing Star Wars necessarily, right, because growing up with it and those sorts of things. I would love to hear about both your like first experience of Star Wars, what draws you to Star Wars, and just generally what your history with Star Wars is.
Well, my first Star Wars memory is so I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and when I was little, because I missed I was too young to really see the first one in theaters when it came out. But I remember they screened it at the Fabulous Fox Theater in Atlanta, which is this, it's a big theater in Atlanta, and it's like an important milestone. And I remember seeing A New Hope, what we now call A New Hope, like in the Fox Theater with my father. And it was amazing. It just blew my mind. And then I also remember seeing Empire Strikes Back with my father, and then coming home and my mother saying, what happened? And I gave her, the big reveal, and it blew my mind. And those are, and I remember, of course, my first Kenner toys, and having the black Darth Vader like case to keep them in, and I lost my father not long after that, and so those are not only some really precious Star Wars memories to me, but they're some really precious father-son memories to me.
Yeah, I mean, I remember distinctly Star Wars began invading my neighborhood via toys with some of the older kids, and so I knew what this was. I remember seeing it. My parents took me to a drive-in, strangely, which must have been the re-release of Star Wars right before Empire came out. I don't believe it was first run, and naturally I loved it because that's what all kids did when they saw Star Wars at that point. And and this is outside of Pittsburgh. Strangely enough, Dave Filoni grew up in the neighboring township to me. We graduated high school in the same year, so when I met him, he knew more about my high school's hockey team than I knew about my own high school's hockey team.
Of course.
Yeah, naturally. And Star Wars was with me my whole life. In fact, at one point, I had to stop watching them. I remember distinctly stopped watching them in high school because I could not differentiate the toys from the films from this, and I wanted to be a filmmaker. And I took this break, and I'll never forget. I went back and rewatched them before the special editions, but the first sort of letterbox versions that came out right before then, to watch them as films, and I got a whole new appreciation of those first three movies that was separated from my own childhood love of them. So it was almost a second life that I got out of them. And my favorite thing about Star Wars, though, I have to say, isn't even Star Wars. It was that Star Wars gave permission to me and a whole generation of creators just to create. Like Star Wars was permission for imagination. And that was the most exciting thing about it. It wasn't necessarily, Darth Vader's his father. What's the history of this? It was, I can make up outrageous stories in distant lands and on distant planets. Like, we can all do this. That is an exciting thing to do, far more exciting than the alternative of not making up stuff. So that's the greatest gift Star Wars has ever given me, was that it ignited my imagination.
I was going to say, Kevin and I are also USC students. So, George Lucas obviously had a major impact at that film school. And, So another way in which Star Wars influenced our lives is it influenced our the way we learned and what we learned, in school.
Absolutely. It's so fascinating how everybody who like works within Star Wars has just these incredible stories of how much it's really influenced their life um woven its own threads throughout. And Doc, you mentioned like the Kenner toys, and I can't help but notice on the shelf behind you got a Von Reg figure.
Oh, I do. Yes.
From Star Wars Resistance.
Yeah.
And that's pretty incredible, growing up with a Kenner figure, and now you have a figure of a show that both you and Kevin got to work on is now in a physical form. Sarah and I also own some of the few Resistance figures that there are. I wish there were more, unfortunately. I wish there was a Miku
we
figure.
Have them all. I've got every one of them up on the shelf. Yeah.
I may or may not have duplicates of them. Just like
out of box,
one to take out of the
box.
box, one to keep in the box.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So like with that in mind, Star Wars Resistance has such a unique look to it. It's very fun. It's very noodly with the characters and the animation and the cell shading. But it also has a lot of mature themes in it as well. As we see like the First Order's encroachment on our heroes. And I would just love to know, just for each of you, like, what do you feel made Resistance so unique in that it set itself apart from other Star Wars projects that have come before, and even the ones that we've been getting, because it's sort of existing in this very unique pocket.
If I can start that one, Doc. Resistance, the very special thing about Resistance, and the challenging thing about Resistance was, and I'm trying to think if this is still true, but certainly at the time, it was the only Star Wars anything other than the movies that were on the edge of the timeline, if you will. When you see the films or whatever, you see most Marvel movies, they're on the edge of the timeline. Occasionally there's one that takes place earlier, but all the animated series up until that point, Clone Wars, Rebels, existed in a well-established, finished timeline that we knew the beginning, middle, and end, and this was happening throughout this. Resistance was exciting because it was anything that happened there was the very limit of it. No one knew what was happening after, Resistance technically leads up to The Force Awakens, and then takes place around Last Jedi, but it didn't go beyond that. It really didn't. It was happening pretty much simultaneously with the events of those films. And that was super exciting. And to this day, there's no Star Wars product that, after they finished Rise of Skywalker, that is up to the existing timeline, if you will. It always takes place somewhere along this timeline, but never on the edge of it.
Yeah, and there was very much a sense, and that was exciting. It was sort of exciting because you felt like you were inside these films as they were coming out, and working around them. Like we did an episode where we had to change droids so that BB-8 could be available on the timeline to go with Poe into the movies. And so there was this fun sense of being on the cutting edge. Also, and it seems silly now, but at the time, there was because we're focusing sort of on pilots and on the platform and not focusing on Jedi, there were people that were saying to us, well, I don't know, you imagine Star Wars stories that don't focus on Jedi? Now, of course, obviously Mandalorian and Bad Batch, that seems today that's not strange, but at the time it was just like, I don't know, if there's not Jedi, what do we do? If there's not lightsabers, what do we do?
I think for me, that's one of the things I found the most refreshing, is we get to follow.
Agreed.
That was Dave Filoni's intention.
Yeah. His intention from the start, was to sort of move it away from that. Had a bunch of influences of things he loved, such as Empire of the Sun and Robotech, and there were these things that he thought were great. But going back to what I said about Star Wars permitting imagination, when I was little, it wasn't all about Luke and the Jedi. I wanted to know there were the Han Solo books. There were these things, like it was all about these broader adventures going on in this universe. So we had yet to have an animated series that wasn't directly tied to Jedi in some capacity, or the Rebellion directly, and that was super exciting.
Yeah, I think it was so cool to also, for me as a viewer, to watch this community, this larger community, deal with the repercussions of the First Order and, Kaz's role as like a sort of a new figure in the community that's been established, and also how they navigate the space that they're in, because the Colossus is amazing. A giant fan. I would have a giant Colossus like figure on my bookshelves behind me if there was one. Like seriously, I love that ship so
There
much.
was, just so you know,
There
on that
was
very
one.
first day, there was a giant
Yeah.
model they put in the center of the writer's room table. It was amazing.
I have heard
Yeah.
about this, and I think that this
Yeah.
is the greatest thing ever. And I'm sad that we all don't get to own one.
Yeah,
Very seriously.
it was amazing.
No,
it was amazing.
It was amazing. And to your point, one of the greatest strengths about it, the films don't have the time to deal with the regular people in the universe so much, right? They never have. It just isn't the nature of these movies, because there's 2 hours there, and so Resistance, even more so than Rebels and Clone Wars, obviously was about regular people who didn't see this coming. One of the things I loved about working on Resistance was that it, like Clone Wars did to the prequels, it informed and, in my mind, improved Force Awakens. It gave this like this slow burn to the First Order, and be like, where did this come from, and how did people just let this happen? And then you see how that comes about. And we also loved Kaz, because Kaz was, the rarity in these kind of stories, like not the orphan kid who came from nowhere that dreams of these things. Like he was pretty well off, like his story was not the Luke story, right? It was not the Harry Potter story. And that was also a bit refreshing. But one of the things we loved the most about this show was that it created its own little pocket world over there, in which we saw how the movies impacted long-term these people, as opposed to the episodic nature of Clone Wars, where we would go to a planet for a few episodes and see how the Clone Wars impacted this. This was an entire series about how this impacted all these people on the platform, right? And that's pretty rare, especially then. It was pretty rare for Star Wars.
I think, like one of the things I love too about this community and getting to watch them over the 2 seasons is just how unique and fun and silly, but also mature, like each of the characters is throughout the story. Did you have any, favorite characters to write, Doc and Kevin? And did any of their voices stand out to you as you were kind of diving into their stories?
Well, I mean, you can't not say Kaz, right? Because that, like Kevin said, he's a different kind of Star Wars hero, and had this voice that was, I mean, Christopher Sean was so embodied the character, and it was so just, you could hear his voice in your head when you were writing, once he had been cast, not in the first season, and it just embodied the character so well that it'd be exciting to spend time, with Kaz. Niku also, I mean, fun, just like like when we were developing originally, his code name was Radar, like before his fixed name was set, and like because it's sort of well, anyway, he was just fantastic and made such a cool counterpoint to Kaz. So yeah, I mean, they were a great partnership to write.
Yeah, I have to say that. I mean, we write a lot of shows, and oftentimes your main character ends up being the driest, most boring one, and all the fun characters are the ones that play off of that main character, right? You end up having, like the straight man to do something, but the interesting characters are the quirky people around that. And this was more along the lines of, what became like Star-Lord and Marvel and whatnot. Like the lead character was also hilariously inept, yet had all the heart, yet would stumble into victory, would have the funny lines and not know what he was doing. Like he, in some ways, was designed and written like, like something a character actor would play, not this big heroic lead. And that was utterly refreshing. Utterly refreshing to go into a circumstance and think, I don't know how he's getting out of this. I have no idea how, and it's going to be funny. But, when you go to Clone Wars, or even Rebels, but Clone Wars especially, Obi-Wan and Anakin, I mean, they are the best there is at what they do, right? They go into a battle, there's never this concern of, like they could be killed by these evil foes, but there's never a concern of, do they have any clue what they're doing? Kaz was the exact opposite. There were absolutely moments where he had no clue what he was doing and ended up victorious, It was definitely, again, another great thing about Star Wars, in my mind, is this notion that it could be anybody. Anyone can be a hero in this universe. And Kaz was definitely that person, right? He didn't have to have Jedi powers or a connection to any bloodline. He was the everyday person stumbling into this scenario and being heroic without necessarily being super skilled at it at first.
Oh, and I guess we also have to say Poe. I mean, we got to write for Poe, and that's amazing. That's an amazing experience. I mean, we to take it from the screen, and that was fun.
Well, let me add to that too. I believe, and stop me if I'm wrong, you two might know more than I off the top of my head, but except for maybe Lando in Rebels, but this was the first series in which they tried to get every member of the cast of the feature films into the animated series. There are occasional characters prior to this, but every one was an attempt to bring, all the main cast from the sequels into the show to really tie it in together.
Yeah, because you had Captain Phasma, Gwendolyn Christie, and then Oscar coming back. And I mean, I know Leia wasn't voiced by Carrie Fisher, but you get Princess Leia and her interactions with Kaz, which is fascinating. Like, you get to talk to Leia Organa, the general. I mean, how cool is that?
Absolutely.
That's awesome,
Absolutely.
Kaz stumbled into some real wins. All of the heroes of the rebellion.
Yeah.
Found family always jumps to mind with Star Wars. It's a cliche, but it's like an important one. And I think for both of you, 2 episodes that jump out to me are the Platform Classic and From Beneath, because they're both family centric. One is Yeager, and he gets to run back into his brother, Marcus Speedstar, and then From Beneath is Flix, when he goes back to his planet and he sees his cousins again. And these very complex relationships that these characters have with one another, but I think are fascinating because it explores those like complex familial relationships. And I would just love to hear if you have any reflections on like those episodes, or just the idea of the importance of family in Star Wars, and also the importance of forgiveness in Star Wars, because we do see that with these characters, these families who are kind of torn apart, and heal that relationship in the episode to come back together in a meaningful way.
Well, I'll say in the Marcus Speedstar, at one point it was contemplated that was going to be Han Solo, which is why the Guavian Death Gang was involved and stuff. And it didn't work out that way. I can't remember why. It didn't work out that way. But when it wasn't going to be Han, it was a question of like, well, then why? Then what makes this character matter then? Like, and that's why we started to, in the writers' room, started to break like, oh, well, who could it be that we would care about? Who would it be that mattered? And that's where we started to go into the backstory with Yeager and the sort of tragedy that divided brothers, and sort of that's the way that we grounded it and made it matter, because we wanted an awesome race, and we knew that the animators were going to pull off an awesome race. But we also need to make, I mean, it can't just be a random guest star that shows up. It needs to be someone that means something to someone, to us, and that's sort of how that the family storyline sort of came into that episode.
Well, Star Wars at its heart really is about familial forgiveness, right? I mean, this is very much a story about, about a dad and his son, and them finding their way together, and ultimately him recognizing his mistakes and forgiveness. So that's always been at the heart of the Star Wars saga. So one of the great things about these animated series is you get to do these episodes that you could never do in a film, which are these smaller side stories with families. I think, that's what makes Star Wars relatable. That's what keeps Star Wars from being some overly, lore-based science fiction thing that is for, really diehard fans. Like, this is what makes it universal. This is what allows a show like this to be loved by obsessive Star Wars fans, but if their friend or their mom or their little sibling or their children, because sometimes parents watch it without their kids, come in, they get what's going on. Do you know what I mean? They don't need to know Flix and the lengthy story of what Flix has been doing on the platform to know when he came home and his cousins, have beef with him, that's a problem that they can relate to, right? That's a problem they can be like, okay, I get that. That's universal. That happened. That works outside of the Star Wars world, and that's always been an important part of Star Wars in general, is the relatability of these characters.
Yeah, the Yeager's line is, "It's important to forgive people. When you don't, nobody wins." And I thought that was just like excellent Star Wars,
Right.
an excellent Star Wars lesson that both of you guys put to paper, and now I think of fondly, because it's important for Star Wars and our own experiences. In
Yeah,
life
right. That's
as well.
good. So we've helped you improve in your life there. I'm glad to see that.
Yes, thank you.
definitely-
Yes.
Good,
Therapy
good.
costs money, but Star Wars Resistance is free.
Yeah.
So there we
Just
go.
the cost of
You
that
know what? I'm
Disney
gonna-
Plus subscription.
Yeah,
I'm
that
writing that
$8.
down. I'm writing that down. That's amazing. Therapy costs money, but
It was also, I mean, it was a time, not to be too overtly political or anything, but it was a time when there was some division in households and families, just politically, and it's a time when we're writing a story about ways in which, fascism can insidiously creep into your day-to-day life without you even realizing it, or with you thinking of it as security. So some of that while it's sort of distantly in the future, some of that was kind of seeping in. It's sort of very much about also what was happening around us in the time we were in those rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. First Order Occupation, another episode that you guys wrote, and I think that one starts with somebody on the Colossus, and he's being asked for his ID or his papers, and he's not sure why. So that definitely seeps into the show in so many ways, but I think it's what made it very timely when we were watching it, and why it's connected with a lot of fans, as we see. And I've oftentimes said like Andor in some ways is similar to Resistance, because Andor is dealing with some of those same concepts of fascism and its crushing weight on the everyday people, and that's why I tell people watch Star Wars Resistance and Andor. Why not?
Well,
Watch them both.
I mean, and it's what we have to do as writers, which is help people to sort of understand, through characters, like how circumstances can come about, or watch people go through difficult things and see how they deal with them. Because in a lot of ways, it ends up being, especially for our younger audience, like these are lessons. I mean, it's important for all the shows we write, not just Star Wars, but whatever it may be, Spider-Man, Ninjago. Like, these are watching characters go through these difficult times that reflect the world you live in, and watching how they deal with them to give you ideas and strengths to navigate it yourself. That's ultimately the goal. That's ultimately the best thing that can come out of this.
I think especially it's, important for young audiences. And, Star Wars, that one line from George Lucas, Star Wars is for 12-year-olds or what have you.
Right.
And it is, but like, it's also not. And it contains multitudes and is for many audiences. But, you get a particular message and you get a particular story in the films of like, the hero's journey and the archetypes that you're good and evil, black and white. It's the morality is a bit... it's very clear, in the films. And I think what's so great about Resistance in particular is that because we're with everyday people, the morality feels different in the room, because they're dealing with different questions than, Luke Skywalker, hero of the galaxy, is dealing with. And yes, all the kids want to be hero of the galaxy, but also, they're everyday kids as well. And so for me, I love watching, the shows and reading the books for younger audiences, because they're able to distill the lesson and the message in such a way that is clear and often gentle, but real. And I think that's such a great through line for Resistance as well, is you're getting these real kind of feelings of reflections of what's going on in the world, but it's not not everything has to be Andor and not everything has to be Resistance. Like there's there's audiences for both of those things, and watching them together or watching them at all can illuminate the ideas a bit differently. Sorry, I'm monologuing at this point.
No, I think you're absolutely right. In fact, I think that, I mean, the Emmys just came out today, so I will gladly link Resistance to Andor. Anytime we want to try to rise it up to Andor's level.
Let's go.
So Resistance. So let's just straight up say Resistance is like just the kid brother to Andor. Let's just
Exactly.
make that statement right now.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
But one of the things that I think is that reason is like kind of what you just said. Regular people there's a lot of Star Wars stories where it's very clear who the good guys and the bad guys are, right? You get into Andor and you get into Resistance, even just visually, I mean, there are characters that aren't dressed in all black or all white or robes, right? There are characters that you do not know where they fit on the spectrum of good versus evil, because they're just trying to lead regular lives, much like all of us, out there. And so I think one of the strengths of writing Resistance, and one of the things we're most proud of, is, like Andor, the sort of subtlety of what is going on, right? Like, there's not, like, the genius of Clone Wars is there's not a lot of subtlety in the actual action. It's it's the clones versus the droids, and it's generally, but we all know the subtext is that even when they win, they're losing because they're working for Palpatine. In Resistance, it's more subtle. It's just how insidious these things creep in, and then you notice episode after episode, things are getting a little bit worse. There's not one clear episode where all of a sudden the villains take over and declare that they've taken, that they're now the First Order occupied. It just slowly happens, and that's the subtlety. That's how it would happen. That's how good people fall, and how it has happened. That's how good people fall into difficult situations. And I think I'm probably proud of the subtlety of that show the most, is that it was dealing with issues that were much cleaner than here's the bad guys, here's the good guys.
I think, I keep bringing up community because I just go back to the very end image of Resistance and I'm like, oh, they're hugging. And that's my favorite thing ever. But we often see writing as a very solitary activity, the great American writers and this sort of that. But you guys are in the position of being a writing duo, having worked on Star Wars Resistance and, dozens and dozens of awesome other projects. How did you come to work with each other, and what is your process in writing together? How do you bring your individual voices to your scripts and also come together and have a unique vision together?
I mean, if I can start, Doc. I mean, we met at film school. The short version of that is we met at film school, and took a couple. We were working on other projects, and eventually we started writing together, and that led us into animation. And our process is we break a lot of stories together in the same room, like Doc was saying. Our actual writing process is to just go off like it by ourselves and write. Is type up pages. I know for a fact we would drive each other insane if we were sitting in the same room typing words on the, we'd just literally go nuts. But we have these long talks. Since COVID started, we don't hang out in the same place as much. But we're talking all the time, and then we have to go write the things we talked about. And in terms of unique vision, I think the benefit is that the Venn diagram of our interests overlaps at all the key spots and then doesn't overlap at the spots where we need to check each other on. You know what I mean? So there's certain things that I find more compelling. There's certain things that I'm more focused on at the, by accidentally forsaking other things that I probably should be working on. And Doc focuses on those things, tends to, and be like, this has to happen if this is going to happen. So together we end up with I would like to believe, like a very fully realized, scripts. I mean, our career has been that way, as producers and writers. We've had to come up with very full, rich stories, as well as make them work in the production parameters. It's a series of skills, and some writers you find are good at dialogue. Some writers are good at action bits. We kind of have to be good at all of that for the job, and that helps that our personalities and our interests overlap, like I said, in the right spots, and don't overlap in the other spots that are useful to each other.
Yeah, I would say all that's true. We're friends with other writing partnerships, and some of them work differently, where they sit in a room together and then they argue over every line of dialogue,
every comma.
Yeah. Whereas we'll individually write a pass, then pass that to the other, who will then take a pass, and we'll sort of back and forth, and we'll alternate who's originating the first pass of something. You mentioned writer as a sort of solitary pursuit. I mean, that's definitely I think romantic image of the writer, but I think that's so specific to novelists, that in the I mean, what my favorite thing about being a TV writer, a TV animation writer, is the room where we get into a room and we start hashing out ideas, and we're feeding each other ideas. And I feel like in a really good and really humming writer's room, like you you almost sometimes you don't know whether something was your idea or someone else's idea, because ideas are flowing so fast and it's hard to keep track of where they're coming from. And then somebody mentions something and then you twist it and then someone else twists it back. And then, at the end of the day, it becomes sort of everybody's idea in this sort of wonderful sort of communal way. And I think Kevin and I, as writing partners together, are sort of hold little mini writers' rooms on the phone or, in person, where we just sort of like build off each other's ideas until one of us goes off and writes what we've sort of been breaking together, and that's fun and it's energizing. And sometimes it's exciting, sometimes it's combative, always it's valuable.
Right. And it's always one thing about us, we've been working for years, like it's always story based, right? The story always wins. Do you know what I mean? So whatever we're fighting for, it's never, I'd like this to happen. It's more, here's why this needs to happen story wise. It's never ego driven. We've been very fortunate enough. Doc is super chill in that way. I'd like to believe I'm chill in that way. And we get along together, in that component of it. And it also prevents you don't get as stressed out, because when you're writing solo, you write a line and you're like, is this genius? Is this the worst? Am I the worst? Am I a genius? Is this the best? Like, you don't know what it is, and you're not going to know until you send it out into the real world and people are going to judge it. But there's always one of us. There's always a step between me and the producers, right? And the final production company, and vice versa. There's always one of us going to check it and be like, this is not working, or this is cool, or everything's great. So I always have the comfort of knowing two eyes have been on it, mine and Doc's, before it went in, so that I don't have to sit there horrified that no one on earth is in agreement, or be upset that no one recognized the greatness that it was. Like, we've worked together. You just don't have that singular vacuum that you're working in, that a single writer does.
I started this podcast by myself and eventually added Sarah as the co-host, so I can relate to that, being like, is the words I'm putting out into the universe just complete nonsense? And now Sarah can tell me when they are, and it's fantastic.
Exactly.
So I understand the power of two heads is better than one.
Right.
And it's like so cool to see, like,
I do tell him.
It's like so incredible that you guys have just like worked on so many different things, and like Star Wars included in that. And like, looking at a lot of your other work, you have Lego Ninjago, you have Vox Machina, which is another series from Brandon Auman, who is the EP on Resistance, which that's an awesome show. It's so funny. Spider-Man, Transformers, etc. So like, a lot of those franchises span multiple generations. Like, what draws you to all those different types of stories that exist within that geekdom space? And what do you enjoy the most writing about those other universes as well?
Well, one of the things that draws us to them is that they pay us to make those things, and that's exciting. We're very much into that. The weirdest part is Doc and I both come, Doc more than me, come from independent film backgrounds, and so we started this because we started doing this because we loved originally Marvel stuff, and we loved animation, and we were just fans of it, and so it was exciting to be a part of it before it sort of snowballed into our career. So we always had an interest in it, so we came to it from a pure sense, not a what's the best opportunity for our writing careers, or what's the best, or I want to get in animation. What's my path going to be there? We sort of stumbled into it because we love it so much. And that's what led us into that.
Absolutely. And it's that, we love writing it for the same reason all of us as fans love spending time with it, which is the imagination, the unbounded, at the edge of USC Film School, there's written on the ground is reality ends here. And that's such an exciting concept, like that you can start telling stories unbounded by what is or what has been, and that's the fun part about sci-fi and about other genre stuff, is that it's just endless imagination.
And we've been very fortunate. You start doing these things, we start to become known as people that can handle existing IPs, right, without making it like fan fiction, right? There's a fine line. One of the things that's very important to us is to take these things that we love very much, but also find ways, no matter what they may be, Marvel, Star Wars, Transformers, and move it forward, move the needle forward, instead of it just being treading water and just putting more product out there for the product's sake. Like, these are great stories that we've always loved, but in order for these stories to really matter to new generations and to the people that always love them, they have to go somewhere, right? It can't just still be mired in its own self, right? It has to remain relevant. I've said this about Peter Parker a million times, is that he has to be the evergreen teenager, right? Whenever you're 15, you have to watch it and think, oh, that's me. Because, like, for instance, I have friends that, love the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies because they looked at Peter Parker, the older friends, and they're like, oh, that's me. And then now younger kids see Tom Holland and they're like, that's me. Meanwhile, older people see Tom Holland and are like, is that what kids are like today? I have no idea what kids are like today. But that's what like, these things last a long time. And for them to last, they have to remain relevant to a number of audiences. And to do so, you have to make some bold choices. You have to move these stories forward. You can't keep, doing the same thing over and over again. As much as fans may, it's one of those things where fans may want everything to remain roughly the same, but they also deep down inside recognize when something's not going anywhere, right? Where it's all just staying in the same place. And so we have to walk that very fine line of keeping true to all these franchises while moving the story forward and keeping them relevant.
Preach everything you said. You're like speaking poetry to our ears, because Sarah and I are in total agreement. I think evolving and taking bold steps is so important. And, I think for Resistance, as much as it might seem like a kid's show on the surface, I think it did take a lot of bold steps for Star Wars, being on the edge of that timeline where we haven't been before, dealing with more adult themes of fascism and also like core essential themes of found family and identity and all those other things. And that's what makes it such a memorable show and why we're talking about it today and getting to talk with, two of the minds behind it that brought these characters and these ideas to life. So we love our writers too here on Friends of the Force. TV writers are great.
Well, thank you. We love being TV writers. So this is all working out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Before we end our show, we have a little like rapid fire, but like it's really not a quiz. It's just like a few more things we can learn about you with Star Wars.
Nervous.
No, there's no.
What
wrong
is the name of
answers.
Jabba's pet? I'm just kidding.
Oh God, I am so not a trivia person. Wikipedia is my best friend. Just we were curious about what each of your favorite Star Wars film is.
Oh, this is gosh, if I had to pick. If I had to rank them, I mean, and I don't know, obviously Empire Strikes Back and Star Wars, as I will always call it, are two of my tops. I, as a Gen Xer, absolutely love the prequels. I'm an unapologetic lover of the prequels, which might make me a millennial. But no, I genuinely love them. I when I was doing Resistance, this guy named Paul Duncan was up there at the same time, and we would both get coffee in the morning, and he was telling me about his books, those big archives that he was doing, the prequel one he was doing. And so when I came out, I got that. They sit in my hallway like tomes. Yeah, exactly.
They're
dude.
gigantic.
I stare at that every day. It's the best. It is the best. I mean, I've got both of them. And so I love those six. I mean, that's what I say. I love it. And the other ones, the sequel ones, there's definitely ones that I love more than others. Some I'm in the mood for more than others. But those first six are, to me, where it's all at.
It's a tried and true answer, I suppose, but Empire.
There's no wrong answer if the answer is Empire. I don't know.
Right.
It's always the correct answer.
Right.
Do you have a favorite Star Wars character?
I mean, I think it shifts for me all the time. Like that when I'm watching Andor, it's Andor. And then when I'm watching Mandalorian, it's Grogu. And, I guess I would say I have a constantly warring loyalty to my Star Wars characters. Kit Fisto is among them.
I'm going to say this, when Doc and I were first working together, he had what I would call an uncommon love of Kit Fisto. I would just phrase that. It was this very particular, for a character that at that point had no lines, very specific love for Kit Fisto.
That's what we call a glup shitto. And that's
Yes.
your favorite minor thing that you're like, this is it for me. Yeah.
Right.
Kit,
Yeah, we've
Kit
all-
Fisto really shines in the Gendy Tartakovsky Clone Wars
Totally.
cartoon
Yeah,
as well.
he got
There's a
some
good
love.
Kit Fisto. Yeah, he has the
Yeah,
smile and
Kit Fisto got some
everything.
love.
He's living his best life, except when he got killed in the Senate chambers.
When that happened, Kevin and I saw
Oh.
that movie together in theaters, and when that happened, he just turned to me, and this look he gave me was like he understood. He
Oh,
understood.
not only that, you may not even remember this, Doc. You and I were on a professional email chain, and you sent an extended fan fiction of how Kit Fisto escaped from that scenario. You wrote this. You wrote this.
Well,
I'm not making this up.
didn't-
It was not. I mean, this escape defied science and logic and everything. He was so determined to keep Kit Fisto alive that
all respect to the film, he could have been handled better in terms of his exit, as far as I'm concerned.
All right, so now
Yes.
I think we got to have Doc bust out the fanfic, and we're gonna spend another 30 minutes doing a live
And that
world
email.
premiere
I know.
reading.
I got to
Yeah.
dig it out. See if I still have that email. That was bold.
One year I
if
got like 4 different Kit Fisto action figures for Christmas. Like everybody just gave me Kit Fisto action figures that year.
Did I make a Photoshop of you with Kit Fisto hair at one point too? I'm pretty sure that I did.
100% did.
Oh my God, we had so much
Oh
time on
my
our hands back
gosh.
then. We had so much time on our hands. Yeah. I mean, if I had to pick, my favorite has always been Han Solo. It's always going to be Han Solo. I remember distinctly going to the barber and asking my hair to be cut like Han Solo at one point when I was in elementary school. Like that Han Solo is just one of those people that is part of my DNA.
Is that where the joke in Ninjago is from?
Which
the Zayn
joke?
haircut? When Eric tried to get,
I may
was referring to you getting the Han Solo?
I've got a number of haircuts based on celebrities in my childhood, so we won't go deep into
I
that.
had
But
no
yeah,
idea that line was based in reality.
yeah, I probably had forgotten that too, and now I probably go to therapy for that.
Or just watch
But,
Resistance,
yeah.
like I said.
I just watch Resistance. Why? Therapy costs money. Resistance is free.
Exactly. It all comes back.
But yeah, that's yeah. In fact, every script we write, I'm always trying to find like who's the Han Solo, and I don't just mean the guy who has the great lines, but who's every person that is asking the questions that the audience would be asking, and not taking this all too seriously. And every story needs that person, so that at least we have a barometer for that. So yeah, I love Han Solo.
Absolutely. And our last question here: what does Star Wars mean to each of you as sort of a closing statement, whether personally, professionally, how it's really influenced your life, to sum it up?
Star Wars means a lot to me, and it's meant a lot of different things at a lot of different points in my life. But what came to mind when you asked the question is the original description of the Force, the idea that there's something out there that binds us all together, and that all of us as living things are in some way connected, and in some way what happens to one of us happens to all of us in some way, shape, or form, or affects all of us in some way, shape, or form. And that's sort of the first thing that came to mind when you asked the question, is that Star Wars means to me that we are all in some way connected.
And as I said earlier, what sums it up for me is that Star Wars gave me permission to dream, right? It gave me permission to imagine, and that permission gave me my entire life. Every day I look back on where I am today and think that was the Big Bang. That was the thing that made me who I am.
I feel like I can relate with both of those answers, and the effect that Star Wars has had on each of our lives and brought us to the places that we are now, or had a little influence in that. I think it's one of those really special things. And I think it's awesome that there's a community around this that talks about this on the regular, where we don't forget these things. So before we sign off, we just have to say thank you so much for joining us for the 4th annual Remembering Resistance Day. Thank you so much for your contributions to Resistance. We are just 2 among many, many, many Resistance fans who still love and appreciate the show and think about it on the regular, and may or may not have Niku as their phone background. So it's true. It's been there for a while. But where can people find you online, and what work can they watch and discover and enjoy upcoming, or if they're fans of Resistance that you would love them to check out?
We are currently doing a show, head writers of a show called Lego Ninjago Dragons Rising. Season 1 dropped earlier this year on Netflix in the US and in a lot of other countries on Netflix. Though check local listings in other territories. We've got the second drop of that coming a little later this year. And you can check it out right now.
And on socials, I am Kevin Burke 20 on Twitter and Instagram. Doc is Otherland71 on those things.
I am.
See,
I don't say anything very important though.
Yeah, but it's true. Neither one of us do. If you want to hear nonstop self promotion of our material, that's the place to go.
That's what it's all about.
And Doc said we have Ninjago out, and one of the great things about the streaming, one of the great things about the streaming system is you can find a lot of our older shows. Like on Netflix, we have Stretch Armstrong, Transformers Bots. On Disney Plus, we have a number of Spider-Man shows: Ultimate Spider-Man, Marvel Spider-Man, Rocket and Groot, and Star Wars Resistance. So if you love Resistance, you can go find a number of other shows and other platforms.
Awesome. Well, we will look forward to all that in the coming months and what we can access already. I'm excited. I'm a huge Vox Machina fan as well. It's a great show.
Awesome.
Yeah. So thank you both again for joining us. We really appreciate it. Happy Remembering Resistance Day. And until next time, may the Force be with you always.
May the Force be with you.
Thanks so much for having us. This has been great.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Friends of the Force, and a huge thank you to both Chris and Kevin for joining us on the podcast and sharing how they remember Resistance. And for all of you out there listening, you can find us on all of our socials, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, you name it. And we can also be found on any podcast platform of your choice. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a 5-star written review, because it helps other folks find the show and join the Star Wars discussion.
We also have a Patreon where tiers start at just $1 and they help keep the lights on here at Friends of the Force. We're so grateful to all of our patrons. So thank you to AJ, Ben, Brian, Cheryl, Clay, David, Deborah, Emma, Jennifer, Katie, Knights of Ren, Leanne, Logan, Lucy, Lindsay, Matthew, Rob, Saber Bouquet, Santa, Sky Talkers, Stephen, Tom, Travis, and our newest patron, Ruth. Thank you all so much for your support. We appreciate you. And we appreciate everybody who takes the time out of their day to listen to this episode. I really hope you enjoyed this interview and that you're thinking about that hug at the end of the Resistance that makes my heart so warm inside. Hope that you're well and that you have friends and loved ones around during these winter months.
Absolutely. And I think if you haven't had a chance to watch Resistance, now is the time to start. And you should definitely be revisiting some of those episodes on today of all days, because, 4 years is a long time to be apart from our team Colossus. So thank you all once again for listening. And until next time, may the Force be with you always.
Bye.